Greetings and salutations. Hope this finds you well. Quick shout out to the 2 Uber comrades supporting me on Patreon, this channel, my content. Partner Rosa, thank you. And Independent Left News, definitely check out Independent Left News. So I ended up with some free time today, so I just wanted to chat about some of the things I have been looking at, news stories wise, and different things that are going on in the world, both within the United States and outside of it. And something that wasn't super surprising, but I thought was pretty entertaining, was when AOC went on Mehdi Hassan's show. I think that's on MSNBC, right? And Mehdi was asking her about her voting present on the Iron Dome funding when she had previously said that she was going to vote no on that. And very much in character for AOC, she gives this long-winded word salad response where she said a lot of things, but she didn't really say anything when she did that, which I thought was pretty interesting. So let's check this out. This is from Human Rights Watcher on Twitter. Definitely give them a follow. Their insight and analysis is usually quite on point. So this is their tweet at it. On Sunday, AOC was asked about her present vote in a bill that allocates an extra $1 billion to Israel for their Iron Dome. She defended her decision in the micro. I do believe this created a window in our community to be able to, like, what in the actual, like, just admit, like, you took a cowardly approach. Just say that, like, I wasn't really willing to stand up for the human rights and the basic dignity of the Palestinian people. Like, say that. I would have had, a lot less criticism if she was actually able to do that. But it's always like these very long-winded responses where she doesn't really take any accountability for this atrocious vote, or this present vote. Again, I almost feel like voting present is worse. Like Howard Zinn said, the author of The People's History of the United States, which is a pretty decent book. He said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. I almost have more respect for the people, Democrats, Republicans that voted yes for it, because at least they took a stance. She was just voting present, not going to do it either way. Like, I feel like that's honestly worse in some ways, I think. So
is it worth doing present? Because it didn't really satisfy anyone. The supporters of Israel are mad at you for not voting for it. Critics of Israel are mad at you for not voting against it. Do you regret that?
It is something that I weigh, because
She can't even say yes. I regret it. I was on the wrong side of history on this issue. Like that. Like, again, the Democratic Party is where social movements go to die. We're not going to see any type of substantial material change for the working class in the United States, or the dismantling of the U.S. empire abroad within the corporate duopoly, right?
There's always the macro, and then there's the micro. And in the macro of narrative, of politics, of national impact, I probably should have just gone with my value. But in the macro, which would be to vote no. But in the micro, I do believe that this created a window in our community to be able to...
How did it create a window into your community? You voted present when you should have. Obviously, the correct moral and ethical position would have been to push back against the apartheid state of Israel and the genocide that they're continuing to perpetrate against the Palestinians. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Again, it's not surprising, but it's like this word salad stuff, man. It's horrible. It's horrible. You need some salad dressing for this shit.
Bring all folks to the table, because my great fear is that we are going to import the same sort of contention around this issue, and we can have
You either stand up for the basic dignity and human rights of the Palestinian people, or you're on the side of the apartheid state of Israel. It's pretty clear that she's not ready or willing to stand up for the basic dignity of the Palestinian people. This is just another example of that, right? Her long-winded response where she doesn't really say anything.
Progressive movement that defends Palestinian human rights, that is Muslim, Christian.
But you're not doing that. You literally voted fucking present. I mean, there was at least a few people that voted no against it, right? I think Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, a couple of others, but not AOC.
Jewish. So in the micro, I believe that it created a window of opportunity.
What the fuck again, she's like saying all these words, but it doesn't make a lick of
for
sense
us
to me.
in the Bronx. But in the macro, it was very difficult, yes.
God damn, she's so horrible. So there's AOC's word salad response to why she voted present, to give Israel an additional $1 billion for their Iron Dome so they can continue to perpetuate, these atrocities against the Palestinian people. And again, one of the reasons that the state of Israel is able to, treat the Palestinians in such just horrible and disgusting ways is because of the United States' unconditional support of that apartheid regime. So that was the first little story I wanted to chat about. Now let's chat about the Kellogg's workers going on strike. And this is something that we've been seeing more and more across the United States, these strikes happening in all kinds of different fields. So we have, the Kellogg's workers on strike, the Nabisco workers were on strike not too long ago. And then we also, have like the workers in Alabama on strike. And then we, there's just strikes going on all over the country, which is really amazing because I frankly think that this is one of the few ways that we'd be able to, bring the capitalist system to the bargaining table, if you will, is by people withholding their labor power. So, and Kellogg's is associated with a huge number of brands. So here's the story from Axios. Some 1,400 Kellogg company workers went on strike at all the company's U.S. cereal plants Tuesday. Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers International Union said in a statement seeking a fair contract for workers in negotiations with the company after the previous one expired at midnight Monday. Work stopped at plants in Battle Creek, Michigan, Omaha, Nebraska, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Memphis, Tennessee, where iconic brands such as Rice Krispies, Raisin Bran, Fruit Loops, Corn Flakes, Frosted Flakes are produced. But they're saying Union President Anthony Shelton accused Kellogg's in a statement demanding workers give up quality health care, retirement benefits, holiday, and vacation pay. So obviously, don't cross the picket line, and the picket line in this case would be buying anything related to Kellogg's until these workers are off strike. And then this is from the propaganda coming from the Kellogg spokesperson. We're disappointed by the union's decision to strike. Our offer increases the pay and benefits for our employees, Bonner said. So yeah, all solidarity with Kellogg's workers. We also, so let's just go over some of the brands that Kellogg's is with. Cornell. striketracker.ilr.cornell.edu. Oh, okay, is that like a resource that's tracking all the strikes in the US, or is that like a global thing? But that sounds really awesome. I would definitely make a note of checking that. Thank you, Human Love, solidarity for that. I appreciate it. And then so we also, again, it's not just, food workers. We have healthcare workers, different parts of the United States who have been going on strike at different points. We have the this union that works in Hollywood on movies. Where is that one at? Let's see. So many tabs open. The IATSC union. IATSC struggle is everyone's struggle. Interview with a worker. Yep, and they did end up voting to go on strike. Union behind entertainment. Simply put, IATSC is a coalition of the most of the below-the-line Hollywood crew members. There's the Screen Actors Guild, SAG for actors, the Writers Guild of America, WGA for writers, Directors Guild of America, DGA for directors, the Producers Guild of America, PGA for producers, and IATSC, the International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees, for almost everyone else. That means camera crew, props, editors, costumes, production design, grip, and electric, writers' assistants. They don't get to be in the same guild as the writers, etc. All are in ATSC. Below the line is usually a term used to describe who gets residuals. Above the line crew gets residual checks in the mail, whereas those in IATSC have their residuals go into a large pot that is used to help provide our amazing healthcare and pension plan. There's more nuance to it than that, but it's the gist of it. What are your, so this is what their demands are. We want 10-hour workdays instead. Wow, okay, that's pretty fucking fair. 10-hour workdays instead of 16-hour. Like, how are you supposed to have any quote unquote work-life balance working 16 hours a fucking day? Want enough time to sleep, see our families, and take care of our bodies and souls? Seems pretty reasonable. Want better wages? $16 an hour in Los Angeles is simply unacceptable for a skilled ITSA crew position. Yes, 100%. Especially with the cost of living in Los Angeles and, you know, the type of skills that they need for this job. Most of us have to pay dues to get in a local, and mostly want to be able to trust that our healthcare and pension plans remain fully funded. Currently, the reserves are dwindling at an unprecedented rate because the streaming services have a negotiated deal that because they are new, they don't have to pay a rate. That's fucked up. We all know that in 2021, most of the shows are on streaming platforms. This is unsustainable. So again, there's strikes happening in all types of different industries across the United States. And yeah, solidarity to all striking workers in the United States and abroad. And this is something that Boots Riley talked about. I forgot where he was being interviewed by, but he talked about how withholding the labor power is probably, frankly, the only way we're going to get any type of real substantive material change that will benefit the working class in the United States. And I think he makes a good point about that, especially the fact that, you know, like using wildcat strikes, so striking in solidarity with, you know, other workers in different industries, especially if workers in really, you know, vital industries, you know, strike, particularly, let's say, like shipping or trucking, people who work at the grocery stores, people who work at these food, you know, plants, whether it be Kellogg's or Nabisco or etc. So, and let's quickly look at all the brands that Nabisco is connected with, so we can make a point of making sure we stay away from these brands until these workers are off their strike, right? We got to stand in solidarity with them. So here we go. This is from Go for Jesus on Twitter. It's a pretty funny handle. So here's all the brands Kellogg's owns or is associated with. All brand, Apple Jacks Austin, Bare Naked Granola, Cars, I'm not sure what that is, Cheez-It, Club, Corn Pops, Cracklin Oat Bran, Crispix, Eggo, Fruit Loops, Frosted Mini Wheats, Garden Burger, Honey, Smacks, Incognito, Joy Boy, Jumbo Snacks, Kashi, Frosted Flakes, Corn Flakes, Frozen Breakfast, Raisin Bran, Crave, Morningstar Farms, Mucilix, Multigrain Pop-Tarts, Pringles, Pure Organic, maybe that's some type of juice or something, I'm not sure, Rice Krispies, Smart Start, S'mores, Toasteds, Townhouse, and Zesta. So until these Kellogg's workers end their strike, don't cross the picket line with their dollar, don't support any of these Kellogg's related brands. Same thing with when those Nabisco workers were on strike, is, you know, Danny DeVito said, no contract, no snacks. So pretty interesting. Thankfully for me, I don't don't think I eat anything from those brands, so it shouldn't be super difficult. But I know that's probably not the case for everybody, right? Okay, so went over the AOC Iron Dome word salad. We went over the Kellogg's strike and also the IATSE workers on strike. People behind, some of our favorite movies and TV shows. Now I wanted to talk about this really interesting article about land back and communism. Particularly, we have a lot of, so-called communists online. People identify as being on the left, having very, very frankly reactionary and disgusting and chauvinistic views about this. And then when these people have debates about this, it's everybody who's, shitting on the idea. I'm thinking of Peter Coffin and how he had this panel, but everybody was, shitting on the idea of it, including himself, Caleb Maupin, etc. It's like that's not really what type of learning or new understanding are people going to be able to get from that. Obviously not much of any when everybody agrees on the topic. So I found this article really interesting. It's a pretty long read, so it might take a while, but here it is. It's why communists should care about land back and LGBTQ plus liberation, ending white supremacy, disability rights, etc. by American Johnson. Important note, this article comes to us via my wife and comrade, Luna Nguyen. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing the last name. With editing and a few small contributions from myself. Luna is a Vietnamese. She has a great YouTube channel, Luna Oi. Maybe I'll link that in the comments. Luna is a Vietnamese woman who has a YouTube channel in Vietnam, which you should check out. Agreed. Article is written from Luna's first-person perspective because much of the info is personalized to her own background and draws from her experience as a Vietnamese communist woman as a victim of colonialism. I do find it very frankly problematic when people identify as being on the left or, socialist or communist, and they want to uphold the American flag as, some, great symbol or something, when especially to people outside of the United States, not to mention all of the people in the United States who see it as a sign of horror and genocide and colonial conquest and plunder. But think about how people in the global South feel when they see somebody, draped in the American flag, or somebody talking about the American flag as some, great symbol. Like, isn't socialism supposed to be, internationalism? Right? Isn't that kind of important aspect of it? How do you think, again, people in Vietnam think? Like, they're not going to view you as a fucking comrade when you come draped in an American flag. People in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, people in Latin America with all the, coups the U.S. has orchestrated and supported there. People in Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just very problematic, frankly, when people on the left want to identify as American patriots or talk about how great the, American flag is. Like, no, get the fuck out of here with that. Anytime I talk about secondary contradictions of class society, land back and indigenous liberation, dismantling patriarchy, trans rights, dismantling whiteness, etc., hear the same objections over and over again. These objections tend to stem from one of three core problems: a misunderstanding of scientific socialism, the philosophy of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, based on the methodology and worldview of dialectical materialism, misunderstanding of what liberation movements and ideologies exist to address the secondary contradictions in question, the LGBTQ plus movement, land back / indigenous liberation, anti-racism, etc. Both of the above. So let's try to clear things up and explain how anti-capitalism and other forms of counter-oppression aren't simply compatible with each other, They are dialectically linked with one another, and understanding this linkage is vital for moving the global working class forward toward our goal of a classless, stateless society, which again, that would be communism realized, right? A classless and stateless society. First, let's address three most common responses I receive from socialists when I talk about forms of oppression that aren't capitalism. Objection one, these are all distractions. You're dividing the working class. Ignore this id poll and focus on class. That is something that people like Caleb Maupin will often say, like, this is a distraction, like you're dividing us. This isn't really going to get us towards socialism, right? That's what a lot of these people would say. So point well taken, Luna. First, any discussion of identity is identity politics. True. There are many versions of id poll. I'll be the first to admit that liberal id poll is harmful, 100%, not just to our communist movement, but also to the people who are being negatively impacted by such forms of oppression. Liberal identity politics tend to reduce and essentialize issues of identity to metaphysical, static, isolated categories. These metaphysically distinct categories of human beings are then pitted against each other to compete with each other for resources and attention within the system through the phenomenon of oppression Olympics, or makes me think of like, woke, kind of woke imperialism, right? How the I saw it was, I think the Marines are posting this soldier is now able to, this Hindu soldier is now, or the Sikh soldiers now were able to wear their, head covering thing. Like, well, that's so awesome. Of course, all these competitive theaters between ostensibly divided groups never acknowledge the role capitalism plays both in reinforcing and being reinforced by all these other forms of oppression. I would also like to note that insisting that we never discuss identity politics is in itself another form of identity politics, just as I'm sure any communist would agree. Insisting that we never discuss or address class is a form of class politics. Erasing and suppressing discussions of identity-related forms of oppression is itself a form of identity politics. So given that no matter what, we will be engaging in identity politics, we as communists must find a form of identity politics which best suits our revolutionary morality and goals. Agreed. We must also understand the history of different forms of identity, oppression, and capitalism. Colonialism, for instance, stems from a brutal intersection between race and capitalism. Slavery was also an important vector of intersection between capitalism and race. The ways in which women have been exploited and our labor stolen by the patriarchy relates heavily to capitalism, yes. Suppression of the proletariat has hinged upon both the domestic exploitation of women in households and the division between men and women in the workplace has carried a critical aspect of the divide and conquer strategy of the bourgeoisie all over the world. Thus, class oppression is intertwined and reinforced by countless other forms of oppression. To even begin conceiving of how to unravel this monstrous tangle of contradictions, we have to find a starting point, a primary basis upon which all further investigations and practice can be built. Ho Chi Minh, the great Vietnamese revolutionary that he was, rest in power, comrade, wrote extensively to define a revolutionary conception of morality which is compatible with scientific socialism to be used as a first basis of inquiry and action. Ho Chi Minh's model of revolutionary morality was rooted in one foundational charge: the determination to civilize and liberate human race from being oppressed and exploited. I mean, hard to argue with that, right? This is the foundation of all Marxist morality. My husband and I have a 3-part video on Marxist morality, which you can watch here, based on the excellent book Ethics and Progress by Howard Selsom, which you can read here for free. But to put it briefly, the Marxist viewpoint is rooted in the liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression. Yes. Marx and Engels properly identified economic class as the primary contradiction, human society, but they also firmly recognize that society was divided in many ways. Yes, that's a good point, right? Just because we get rid of, capitalism, which we obviously need to do to forms of oppression, just simply, vanish with it. Like we'd also have to work on, ending these other contradictions, right? While they certainly regard a unified working class as instrumental to overthrowing class society, they knew that unification was merely potential and not the current state of human society. A few relevant excerpts. This is from The German Ideology by Marx. Competition separates individuals from one another, not only the bourgeoisie, but still more the workers, in spite of the fact that it brings them together. Hence, it is a long time before these individuals can unite. Apart from the fact that for the purpose of this union, if it is not to be merely local, the necessary means the great industrial cities and cheap and quick communications have first to be produced by big industry. Hence, every organized power standing over against these isolated individuals who live in relationship daily, reproducing this isolation, can only be overcome after long struggle. To demand the opposite would be tantamount to demanding that competition should not exist in the definite epoch of history, or that the individual should banish from their minds relationships over which, in their isolation, they have no control. In other words, the working class is defined by a complex set of internal, external dialectical relationships with other forms and manifestations of oppression. 100%. Agreed. Marx wanted to see the contradiction which divided the working class negated, but he also realized that such negation could only come from long and arduous struggle in the material world. I'll stay hydrated here. Some nice local spring water. It would be absurd to simply pretend as if the working class were already united, when in materiality it is very clearly fractured and divided. And I think that is definitely true, particularly in the context of the United States, right? Simply ignoring the nature and role of these divisions will only severely delay the unification of the working class and misguide the working people into deeper false consciousness and idealist utopian positions that we can overcome bigotry and division simply by adjusting our mindset or consciously rising above racism and other forms of oppression. Yep. That's why I was saying, just because we get rid of capitalism and have a dictatorship of the proletariat, where we have a socialist society and economic mode of production, doesn't mean these other forms of oppression would automatically go away with that. That's going to take more struggle and work to work out those other forms of contradiction. I say that these positions are utopian because they represent a worldview that fixates purely on abstract ideas that simply present a vision and a distant goal of an ethically just society detached from material conditions and realities. One of the core principles of scientific socialism is that social problems must be objectively understood and tackled through material practice. Yes, like Lenin said, concrete analysis of the concrete conditions. Don't be dogmatic. Don't look at the world from where you want it to be or where it was 20 or 50 years ago. Look at the world how it exists currently. Super, super important. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. The idyllic proceedings are the chief momentum of primitive accumulation. These methods that depend in part on a brute force, e.g., the colonial system, but they all employ the power of the state, the concentrated and organized force of society, to hasten hothouse fashion the process of transformation of the field and mode of production into the capitalist mode, and to shorten the transition. I remember this part. Force is the midwife of every old society, pregnant with a new one. Again, that's why dictatorship of the proletariat, like wouldn't be just willy-nilly, let's let all the counter revolutionaries with their external overthrow this new socialist government, right? Like, that's be kind of silly, kind of stupid, not analyzing material conditions, right? It is itself an economic power. Whilst the cotton industry introduced child slavery in England, it gave in the United States a stimulus to the transformation of the earlier, more or less patriarchal slavery into a system of commercial exploitation. In fact, the veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. If money, according to Augier, comes into the world with a congenital blood stain on one cheek, capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. Wow. Marx, like, he just had a way with words, right? Let's read that last sentence again. Capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. And if you actually look at how capital operates, I don't know how you could argue any other way, right? In the above passage, Marx recognizes the ways in which capitalism fuses, reinforces, and is reinforced by other forms of oppression, like patriarchy, racism, oppression of LGBTQ plus folks, oppression of people with disabilities, etc. Chattel slavery in the United States of America was decidedly not a capitalist mode of production, as enslaved people received no wages, but the demand for raw cotton material in the textile mills in England created such demands for cotton that chattel slavery was necessary to meet the market demands. In this manner, capitalism worsened the conditions, expanding the practice of chattel slavery. While chattel slavery reinforced capitalism and led to other social problems in faraway lands, such as child slavery in English textile mills and other industries, Marx wrote in Letter to Engels, 1869, as to the Irish question, the way I shall put forward the matter next Tuesday is this, that quite apart from all phrases about international and humane justice for Ireland, which would be taken for granted in the International Council, it is the direct and absolute interest of the English working class to get rid of their present connection with Ireland. And this is my most complete conviction, and for a reason which in part I cannot tell the English workers themselves. For a long time, I believed that it would be possible to overthrow the Irish regime by English working class ascendancy. I always expressed this point of view in the New York Tribune. Deeper studies now convince me of the opposite. The English working class will never accomplish anything before it's gotten rid of Ireland. The lever must be applied in Ireland. This is why the Irish question is so important for the social movement in general. And you see, Marx being able to change his thinking when he's able to analyze the concrete conditions in this question, in this case about Ireland. That's why it's so important to be able to take new information, new points of view, analyze what's actually happening on the ground, and be able to adopt that to your thinking and outlook. And I feel like that is one of the things that these proletarian patriots or these patriotic socialists, these communists, these particularly white communists who think the American flag is something to be upheld, or how land back is somehow anti-communist. They really need to actually engage in some self-criticism like Mao talked about. But it seems like people like was it Haas Infrared or something like that absolute hack, or Caleb Maupin or Jackson Hinkle or Peter Coffin, they aren't able to engage in that self-criticism, and it's just they just have a echo chamber around them of people that are just telling them, yeah, you're right, not calling them out at all, right? Clearly, Marx was very aware that the colonization of Ireland was harmful to both Irish workers and to English workers as well, and that before there could be any hope of dismantling capitalism in England, the colonial subjugation of the nation of Ireland had to be first negated. Ireland had to be decolonized. Yeah, so these people claim, to be, Marxist, Leninists, and American patriots, but they're actually, what they're espouting goes against Marxist, Leninist, thought and worldview. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Ireland had to be decolonized. Ireland needed autonomy, self-determination to have their land restored. Otherwise, English workers would, in Marx's own words, with Marx's own emphasis, never accomplish anything. This blows away the argument commonly held by class reductionists that Marx believed that we need to overthrow capitalism before we can address other forms of oppression. Marx very clearly believed that the secondary contradiction of the colonization of Ireland need to be addressed before capitalism can be tackled in both Ireland and the UK. Positions like these are extremely common in the works of Marx and Engels and have been expanded on and developed by countless Marxists since. Marxist revolutionaries have been aware of and seeking to understand the dialectical relations between capitalism and other forms of oppression going back to the beginning, because Marxism is a project of liberating all human beings from all forms of oppression. Yes, 100%. Shout that from the fucking rooftops. Which brings us back to Ho Chi Minh's revolutionary morality and the next characteristic which Ho Chi Minh ascribes to morality. Revolutionists must clearly understand good things and bad things. And something that Mao talked about in his, little red book was the ability to be able to differentiate your friends from your enemies. Uncle Ho taught us that it's important to understand the difference between right and wrong. Going back to the foundation of Ho Chi Minh's revolutionary morality, good is defined as that which furthers the cause of liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression, while bad is defined as that which hinders the cause of liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression. So, these quote unquote, communists, particularly white ones, it seems, who are talking shit about land back or spouting this nonsense about being an American patriot and also being a Marxist-Leninist and anti-imperialist, like they would be bad in this example because they're for upholding this form of oppression. They're against this, liberatory work that needs to happen, right? In Marxist morality, good actions and bad actions are defined by the material conditions. Bourgeoisie moralists often ponder whether the ends justify the means and try to construct metaphysical branches of moral categories to try to determine universal answers to moral quandaries. But revolutionary morality instead asks a question: do the material conditions justify the means? Focusing on the ends make no sense from a scientific socialist point of view for two reasons. We have no way of knowing what the ends will be. The ends might have unforeseen consequences or may manifest in unexpected ways. It's true. Ends and means have dialectical nature. Whatever end results from any action become the material conditions for future means. The material conditions we exist in now are the ends of countless prior struggles and human activities. Therefore, when contemplating the moral question of what we should do, we should not focus on the ends and other hypotheticals, but on the material conditions which exist in time and place that we currently occupy. And again, that is a very Marxist-Leninist outlook, what Luna just said there. We must have a vision for what we hope to accomplish with our actions, yes, but this must be a concrete vision which is grounded in our material reality, with a material sense of how we can get from where we are to where we want to go. This becomes particularly relevant because utopian class reductionists like to throw monkey wrenches into liberation discourse by asking inane questions like this. So this is the type of shit that Caleb Maupin often spouts, and wanted to possibly have him on the channel at some point in the past, but after I've seen his ridiculous shit on this, like I don't want to be platforming somebody like that, frankly. How are you going to give all the land back to indigenous people? What do you want? Kick all the white people out of the USA? You can't completely abolish whiteness. That will never happen. It's an unrealistic goal. It will take decades to fully liberate LGBTQ plus people who don't have that long. We have to end capitalism now. These kinds of idealistic distractions which focus on hypothetical end states instead of the current material conditions, ongoing struggles, and existing dialectical relations between capitalism and other forms of oppression distract from the real material conditions. Again, that's why when people say that, when people throw all these canards about, land back or being American patriots or whatever, they're actually, when they claim to be, Marxist-Leninists, they're actually, doing the complete opposite of using a, Marxist Marxist-Leninist worldview and, analysis, right? Let's see. Skipping ahead to matters of the end game forces oppressed people to engage in drawn-out hypothetical discourse about how we might completely eradicate this or that form of oppression instead of focus on what can be done right now to weaken these secondary contradictions and, by extension, capitalism. I'm just going to be eating a little Asian pear breakfast. These are Chojuro Asian pears, homegrown, super good. Food Not Lawns, Fruit trees are amazing. If you're able to plant some, please do it, even if it's guerrilla gardening, right? We're expected to drop everything and focus on answers to hypothetical questions you can't possibly know because the material conditions just haven't developed in us for having any basis for discussing endgame strategy. So clearly distinguishing between good and bad means focusing on what can be done in here and now to alleviate the suffering and weaken the oppression of all human beings from all forms of oppression. Excuse me. Fixating on irrelevant and distant hypotheticals and couching oppressed people as mere distractions, therefore, is clearly bad. Yes, 100%. That's why when, so-called communists or Marxist-Leninists act in the way she's describing, they are being clearly bad, right? From Ho Chi Minh's discussion, because they aren't working to, liberate and end these forms of oppression. Focusing on concrete steps which can be taken in the real world right now, right here, right now, to alleviate the suffering of people is good. Now let's move on to Ho Chi Minh's next characteristic of revolutionary morality, maintaining political standpoint. The common criticism which utopian class reductionists throw around is that we are not being Marxist, which, again, in seeking to negate secondary contradictions within the working class, I've already shown Marx is very aware that the working class is not yet united. He knew that before capitalist class could be overthrown, it's vital that we negate secondary contradictions which keep the working class divided. So good. Been eating from this tree solid probably 3 weeks, and there's still some fruit on it. Last time I was there, it's a small sampling of the Asian pears. I probably got one tree alone, 35 to 50 pounds of fruit. So amazing. Food not lawns, food not bombs. In Vietnamese dialectical materialism, the standpoint or viewpoint is a starting point of analysis which determines the direction of thinking from which phenomenon problems are considered. Scientific socialism, a methodological philosophy developed by Marx and Engels, is a series of socio-political economic theories intended to build socialism based on a foundation of science as well as society's material conditions. While it's absolutely true that the economic class antagonisms have developed under capitalism into only two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the working class and the capitalist class, it's also undeniable that the working class itself does not exist in monistic unity. It's not a single and invisible entity in its own right, 100%. This is obvious for many reasons, but most essentially because nothing in reality exists as a monolith and monistic unity. Dialectical materialism upholds that everything, phenomena, and idea in our universe exists as a collection of internal and external relations. The working class, therefore, exists as an assemblage of internal and external relations. We're defined by external relation with the capitalist class, yes, but we're also defined by the internal relations between the real human beings which make up the working class, including all the contradictions of bias, prejudice, social tension, false consciousness, etc. Maintaining our political standpoint means not straying into utopianism, idealism, and metaphysical monism and other standpoints which contradict the core tenets of scientific socialism. 100%. Again, concrete analysis of the concrete condition. That, is Marxism, Marxist-Leninism in a nutshell. Actually looking at what is going on in the world, not where you think it might be in the future or where it was in the past. What is actually going on right here, right now, in the present world. Being pious to the people. The word pious here is not a great translation. The word Ho Chi Minh used in traditional Vietnamese, Hayu Thao, probably mispronouncing that, almost sure, which has a traditional meaning of filial piety, treating your parents with unconditional love. Ho Chi Minh co-opted this term, which has strong cultural connotations in Vietnamese society, to define the relationship which the revolutionary must have with the global proletariat. We must give the people our unconditional love, our utmost respect, our willingness to sacrifice and struggle for their well-being, protection, and liberation. One aspect that we can perhaps refer to as proletarian piety is listening to the people and being receptive to their suffering, which it seems like, these communists who, think the American flag is something to upheld or talk shit about land back as being, anti-communist. They're not being really receptive to the suffering of so many people within the United States and outside of it when they spout off this nonsense, right? One of the key points of victory which enabled the Communist Party of Vietnam to win over the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese was simply listening to them, understanding their struggle, and working to address their suffering directly, which, again, the people I was just mentioning, they do the exact opposite, right? When the people were starving under Japanese fascist colonial rule, Communist Party broke into the imperial storehouse and distributed food to the people in order to earn the trust and camaraderie of ethnic minorities. Ho Chi Minh went and lived among them for extended periods of time to learn their struggle and work to alleviate their suffering. Ho Chi Minh also identified the ways in which South Vietnam puppet government was using fascistic family values similar to those espoused by the Third Reich to subjugate women, divide the working class, and build sort of a fascist utopian moralism similar to what Michael Parenti describes in Black Shirts and Reds. That is a great book. Parenti has a lot of good books. That one, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, is also a really good one. Parenti's work, in general, is definitely worth checking out, in my opinion. Fascist doctrines stress monistic values: one people, one rule, one leader. People are no longer to be concerned with class division, but must see themselves as part of a harmonious whole, rich and poor as one, view that supports the economic status quo by cloaking the ongoing system of class oppression. It's like a, workplace, like we're a team, like we're a family. Like we had like your birthday cake. We gave you, a birthday party one year. We're all one here, even though we're, exploiting you on a continual basis day after day. Fascism's national chauvinism, racism, sexism, and patriarchal values also served a conservative class interest. Patriarchal ideology was linked to a conservative class ideology that saw all forms of social equality as threats to hierarchical control and privilege. Patriarchy buttressed this, the plutocracy. If women get out of line, what will happen to family? And if family goes, the entire social structure is threatened. What then will happen to the state and to the dominant classes' authority, privileges, and wealth? The fascists were big on what today is called family values. Fascist regime of the South Vietnam puppet government and the fascist dictator Ngo Dinh Diem emerged from reactionary elements of bourgeoisie Vietnamese society, which emerged the cultural conservatism of Confucianism and Catholicism with the brutality of fascism to preserve capitalist class relations. This ideology lined up nicely with the goals and political standpoints and Ngo's handlers in the USA, which they were undemocratically placed him in power to begin with in 1954, shortly after the Geneva Agreement, which officially divided North and South on the 17th parallel. So good. Again, like the marvel of fruit trees. Think about how many fruit trees we could plant in the United States if we defunded the military industrial complex, prison industrial complex. Literally billions of fucking fruit trees here and globally. I just think that would be awesome. Ho Chi Minh wrote and worked extensively to negate these contradictions because he knew that patriarchy and the oppression of women only sought to keep the working class weak and divided. He wrote countless articles about the liberation of women and helped build dual power structures like our Vietnam Women's Union, which is an important and powerful structure in Vietnamese society to this day. Uncle Ho didn't do any of these things like struggle struggling for women's liberation and living among ethnic minorities to understand their struggles for the sake of optics, right? Like liberal idpol ideologists, but out of his piety for the people. He knew that listening to the concerns of the people was the only way to find a path forward, to know their material conditions intimately, to seek out the contradictions which divide the working class so as to find the best ways of negating them. But this wasn't just cold and cynical strategic calculus. He didn't view women and other marginalized people as a means to end of communist revolution. He truly cared about the suffering of the people. Ho Chi Minh wanted to liberate all humanity from all forms of oppression. His love for people would not allow him to stand for anything which caused misery and suffering if he could help it, which it seems like, these quote-unquote communists who are talking shit about, land back, or again, espousing how the American flag or being an American patriot are some great thing. They don't really seem to understand or want to understand, or are incapable of understanding the misery and suffering that the positions that they're espousing cause, right? Ho Chi Minh came to this worldview through his own experience as a young, poor, itinerant worker. During his travels around the world, he became politically active while living in Paris, and initially his primary concern was the liberation of his own people back home in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh attended various political meetings and found that only one group, the communists, would listen to the concerns about his homeland. As he wrote in The Path Which Led Me to Leninism, I'm going to have to check that book out. I bet that's awesome. The reason for joining the French Socialist Party was these ladies and gentlemen, as I called my comrades at that moment, has shown the sympathy towards me, towards the struggle of the oppressed peoples, but I understand neither what was a party, a trade union, or what was socialism or communism. Here we see Ho Chi Minh as a naive young revolutionist, unsure what path he would take. He came around to communism not because of deep theoretical understanding of the nature of class conflict, nor an abiding hatred of capitalism, because the communists showed him proletarian piety. They listened to him. They were willing to engage him and listen to, his struggles, his worldview, etc. They welcomed him, listened to him, sympathized with his own immediate concerns about the racist and colonial subjugation of Vietnamese people, because of the writings of Lenin expressed the same thread of proletarian piety. Ho Chi Minh continued attending meetings of the French Socialist Party. The great topic of discussion at the time was whether the French Socialist Party should join the Second or Third International, which held competing ideological positions on various issues. Ho Chi Minh attending these discussions with one question in mind. What I wanted most to know, and this precisely was not debated in meetings, was which international sides with the people of colonial countries. Important question to ask, and right. Eventually, Ho Chi Minh came to see that it was Lenin's Third International which addressed his sole concern, which has nothing to do with capitalism. Through reading Lenin and learning about the Third International, Ho Chi Minh became a communist. Ho Chi Minh became convinced that through these interactions and discoveries that communism was not only sympathetic to the cause of decolonization of Vietnam, but that communism would be the key to decolonization of Vietnam. As Ho Chi Minh wrote, at first, patriotism, not yet communism, led me to have confidence in Lenin. The Third International, step by step, along the struggle by studying Marxist-Leninism, parallel with participating in practical activities. It's important, like applying theory to practice, right? Applying it to the real world. I gradually came upon the fact that only socialism and communism can liberate the oppressed nations, the working people throughout the world from slavery. Can you imagine what would happen if the French communists, rather than welcoming Ho Chi Minh, listening to and sympathizing with his concerns, and demonstrating that they had an interest in decolonization, they instead dismissed Ho Chi Minh as non-Marxist for being concerned with colonialism, dismissed his objections to the brutal subjugation of Vietnamese along racial lines, a distraction, told them to focus on the working class and stop worrying about all that idpol. I shudder to think it would certainly at least have delayed the chain of events which led to the liberation of my people and the beginnings of our great socialist project, which we continue to build today. As Ho Chi Minh developed into a mature and well-read communist, His work began to focus on addressing the French workers directly to extol upon them the nature of colonialism and how it hurt not just colonial subjects, but French workers as well. In various publications, Ho Chi Minh wrote passages like the following. Capitalism is a leech with one hose attached to the proletariat in the main country, another to the proletariat in the colony. If one wants to kill the animal, one has to cut both trunks at the same time. If only one is cut off, the other one will continue to suck the blood of the proletariat. The animal will continue to live, and the severed proboscis will grow back. All the pressed friends in the main country, the bourgeoisie in our country, has deceived you and used you as a tool to invade our country. Today, still, using the same insidious policy our country's bourgeoisie intends to use to suppress all of your efforts for self-liberation. In the face of capitalism and imperialism, our interests are united. Remember, Marx calls proletariats of all countries unite. Colonial union. Unfortunately, Ho Chi Minh made little headway with getting the French proletariat to materially fight on the behalf of it and collaborate with the colonial subjects of Vietnam and other French colonies. As Ho Chi Minh wrote somewhat bitterly in an article of El Humante, 1922, titled The Indifference of the Proletariat in the Main Country Towards the Colonies. And also very, very good. In his thesis on questions of the colonies, Lenin wrote, "Mission of the workers of the main country is to assist the liberation movements of the colonies." Or I would say even, within the internal colonies that we have in the United States, right? In order to do that, workers in the main countries need to know exactly what the colonies are, what happens in those colonies. They have to know that the colonial subjects are more miserable, 1,000 times more miserable than the workers in the main country. They have to know suffering their brother and sister proletarian workers in the colonies are bearing. In short, workers in the main country have to care about all the problems in the colonies, but sadly, the vast majority of the proletariat in the main country still think the colonies are just a sandy land with hot sun and some green coconuts, some people with different skin color. They quite simply do not care about us. Ho Chi Minh never stopped appealing to the French workers, and the French soldiers and mercenaries working for the French who supported a revolutionary struggle deserve much praise and reverence, but they were unfortunately vanishing few and far between. There are many other examples of communists recognizing that uniting the working class is a process of negating internal contradiction. Lenin saw secondary contradictions such as the peasant/industrial worker divide as chief concerns and worked tirelessly to find ways of negating this massive internal contradiction to build a united proletariat in Russia. And it's not just Marxist-Leninists who recognize the divisive nature of secondary contradictions and the harm they do to the working class. Anarchists like Nestor Makhno were intensely opposed to anti-Semitism. This is what Makhno wrote in 1927. All of the Jewish toilers of the Ukraine, as well as other Ukrainian toilers, are well aware the movement, which I was for years the leader, was a genuine revolutionary workers' movement. At no time did that movement seek to divide the practical organization of the deceived, exploited, and oppressed toilers on the grounds of race. Quite opposite, it aimed to unite them into a mighty revolutionary union capable of taking action against their oppressors, especially against the Dinkinists, who were dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semites. At no time did the movement make it its business to carry out pogroms against Jews, nor did it ever encourage it. What is more, the vanguard of Ukraine's Makhinovist revolutionary movement contained many Jewish toilers. The Gulia Poili infantry regiment, for instance, had one company made up exclusively of 200 Jewish toilers. There were also a 4-piece artillery battery, the gunners' defense units, which were all Jews commanded, included, and there were lots of Jewish toilers in the Makhinovist movement who, for personal reasons, preferred to blend in with mixed revolutionary fighting unit. All right, I'm going to skip that. So it doesn't matter what your political tendency might happen to be. If you want to unite the working class, you must recognize that internal contradictions must be negated. Indeed, the process of uniting the working class is itself the process, yes, of negating internal contradictions which divide the working class. You simply can't negate such internal contradictions by ignoring them. which it seems like what these white, communists want to do, right? Secondary contradictions will manifest differently in different places and develop over time, but as long as they affect the working class, can't be united. Thus, contradictions like racism and colonialism aren't distractions, they're the internal social relations which define the working class in its current stage of development. How are you going to dismantle racism, achieve land back, liberate women, etc.? Just a vague idea. What are the concrete steps? This is a misunderstanding dialectical process. It's like asking, how do you build communism? It's a question that can be answered with any universal prescription. Yes. All forms of oppression have dialectical continuity. It is true, as class reductionist utopians like to say, that class is not an identity. Class is an economic relation that presents what Marx terms the base of society. Many other forms of oppression, such as sexism, transphobia, etc., relate more to the superstructure, but that doesn't mean they exist in metaphysical isolation from the economic base. Marx knew that the base and superstructure of society have a strong dialectical relationship with each other. The base defines the superstructure, but the superstructure impacts the base. Clearly evident that capitalism defines the ways in which racism and sexism, other forms of identity oppression, manifest with capitalist societies. It's also quite clear that these forms of identity oppression also impact capitalism. So let's see how much more we got here. It was a long article. Hey, it's just done. And there we go. I'm going to end up with this one. Seen countless self-described communists display a spectrum of misunderstanding ranging from honest ignorance to aggressive reactionary bigotry and chauvinism pertaining to philosophy of land back. Definitely see this to be true if you look at any of Luna's comments or tweets about the issue of land back, right? Some people have objections to the term land back itself, calling it a bourgeoisie construction which seeks to restore private land ownership to indigenous peoples. It's a gross misunderstanding of indigenous conceptions of the relations between humans and land. So let me give you a brief overview of indigenous land philosophy. First, let us recognize that indigenous people of the world are not a monolith. I can't speak for all indigenous people, nor could any indigenous individual. Land philosophy manifests in many different ways for different indigenous people. This relates to dialectical materialist concept, which in Vietnamese socialism we call private and common. Just like with communism, land back manifests in different ways for individual indigenous people's private aspects, to use the dialectical materialist terminology of Vietnamese socialism, but there are also commonalities which exist across most indigenous movements. As Hawaiian native Silver Spook explains, Hawaiians have a concept of Aina, which they conceive of the land as mother. There's Fanon. Silver Spook explains that Aina means the balanced ecology of Mother Earth with the thriving of the people. Indigenous people were technologically, politically, economically advanced, and also balanced the ecology of Aina, Hawaiian for Earth, with thriving of people. We didn't excel at mass killing and lying, unlike the colonizer, whose noble savage myth is racist and historically incorrect. Native Hawaiians are hardly the only indigenous people to have this kind of philosophy. Common land ownership, as Julian Brave Noise Cat writes, ingrained in each Salish community then is the idea even older than our indigenous languages, that the people are of the land and the land is of the people. These kindred spirits are alive and inseparable. Admittedly, Noise Cat is not a Marxist. Marx, Lenin, and Mao are dismissed by Noise Cat, no longer offering a size sharp enough to fell the stalks of capitalism. On this point, we might differ, but Noise Cat's philosophical description of indigenous conception of land line up with the conversation I've had with indigenous comrades from all over the world. We don't need to agree about everything to agree that the communists were neither the first nor the only people in history to conceive a world which land and means of production are held in common. Agree. In this incredible video by Twin Rabbit, where I told the story of how indigenous philosophy served as the very foundation for many of the ideas Marx and Engels and the various founders of various socialist philosophies of the West. even the liberal democracy of the USA, which was formed based on the Iroquois Federation, right? To erase the history of indigenous people as progenitors of many of the philosophical concepts which form Western socialism, including common ownership. And by erasing the anti-capitalist struggle of indigenous people who live and breathe today, you're helping the bourgeoisie recuperate these movements and hindering the negation of these internal contradictions, which has plagued the working class since the foundation of capitalism. Three general goals: the land back, sovereignty, self-determination, autonomy, and an end to all colonial suppression, land rights, restoration of land which was stolen so indigenous people can restore our cultures, economic standing, ways of life. How much land do they want to kick everyone out? I'll answer this later. Ecology, the protection of land, and the end of destructive practices which are irrevocably harming a planetary ecosystem. And this is the highest priority for almost every indigenous person I've ever talked to, including myself. Communist Manifesto, another good read by Marx. It's not super long either. Practical application of the principles will depend, as a manifesto it says, everyone at all times on the historical conditions of the time being existing. Oh, I'll link this down below, but like I've been reading that article for very, very long time. One sec. Have you had a Asian pear before? If so, did you like it? Because I really, really do. So good. Okay. I'm going to end the video after talking a little bit about the Cuban Five. So the Cuban Five, Cuban revolutionaries who were living in the United States at the time, and they were framed up by the U.S. government in 1998 on these, trumped up charges that so many, people can probably, relate to the U.S. and justice system. And so they were convicted on these, again, on the charges that they weren't, guilty of, framed job by the U.S. state. And the map, when it's broken up like that, they were all sent to different parts of the United States after their conviction. They all showed solidarity, didn't turn, on each other, anything like that. They received a hero's welcome after being released in 2015, 2016, and 2015. Yeah, this is them meeting with Castro before Castro passed away. And then, the little subtitle on here is the poor who face the savagery of the U.S. justice system. And it's very interesting to hear the Cuban Five's perspective, I should say, on the U.S. prison system, and then talk about what prison looks like in Cuba, and just how they're, polar opposites, and how in the prisons in Cuba, it's like they actually care about the person. They don't try to, demonize them and completely disconnect them from, their family or the broader society in any type of way. Like, the U.S. injustice system, it's basically lock you up, throw you away in a cage, treat you as horribly as possible, and just very, very degrading. And again, the United States is supposedly land of the free, but we have we're the world's biggest, prison population in in the land of the free and how we actually still have slavery in the United States. Slavery was actually never gotten rid of because they made an exception for people while they're locked up behind bars. They also mentioned the fact of how, I think it's like 95% of federal prison cases, people plead out before, and if you go to trial, I guess, that's like almost like a badge of honor for the people that are in U.S. prisons who actually went to trial, because they stood up to the state. It's like, no, I'm not taking a plea bargain. I'm not guilty. I'm not going to do that, and then, the people that do go to trial in the United States, the prosecutors throw the book at them and try to make an example of them. Like, nope, we're going to give you as much time in prison as possible if you don't take, this plea bargain, and try to make an example of those people, right? And then they also point out how it's a, form of social control, right? Because, in the United States, imprisonment, this is page 39, is a way of dehumanizing a human being. It's a way of isolating from society, including your family, to make you feel alone, to make you feel depressed, to make you feel as if you have no one to turn to make it easier to obtain a guilty plea. An individual ends up isolated from everything, not knowing how to confront this monster. You're not innocent until proven guilty. It's the opposite. You're guilty unless, with great difficulty, you can prove you're innocent. You're up against the system. Think about the name they give the indictment. For example, United States of America versus Gerardo Hernandez et al. The U.S. government, with all its machinery and resources, comes down on you like a ton of bricks. They give you a jury selected in ways that favor the government, and in the end, they're going to convict you since you're considered guilty from the outset. And then, here we go. This particular quote in general just really summed it up for me. This is page 40. The American system of justice serves above all to sustain a system that it has no solution for the poor. It's a way of preventing conditions from a revolution emerging. Again, just a form of, social control. And as that quote points out, people in prison filled largely with poor people, particularly, poor people of color, but also poor, white people as well. This is page 42. Then I'm probably in the broadcast after this. U.S. capitalist justice, some facts. This was 2015 or 16, so these statistics might even be worse, at this point. World's jailer in chief, world's highest prison incarceration rate. U.S. has 4.4% of the world's population, but 22% of world's prisoners. Some 7 million people, 1 out of 35 adults, are in federal or state prisons or local jails or on parole or probation. 1 out of 35 adults are either in federal, state, or local jail or under state supervision, right? 5% of adult males and 17% of adult males who are Black are or have been behind bars. Plea bargains and the right to a trial. 97% of federal and 94% of state convictions in criminal cases result from the accused pleading guilty to charges horse-traded by prosecutors and defendants' lawyers. Federal cases in 2003, defendants insisting on their right to a trial got sentences averaging, here we go, nearly 3 times longer than those taking a plea bargain. Look at that. 97 on the federal and 94 on the state level, the plea bargain. Life sentences, death row on the whole. More than 10% of U.S. prisoners are serving life sentences, nearly a third life without parole. Some 1 in 20 states and federal inmates are in the whole, solitary confinement or other punishment cells. Again, solitary confinement is most definitely a form of torture. Some 1 in 20 states and federal inmates, 2,984 people are in death row. This was in 2015. Class, race, incarceration. The vast majority of those behind bars are from the working class. Some 40% are Black. 1 in 10 men in their 30s who are Black is in jail or prison any given day. Whew. And then it talks about 43, going to trial gives you some standing among the prisoners. They say the man stood up to the government, and that's a big help. They know it means you won't finger them. Warden guards encourage snitching among the prisoners, including among them those who are serving life sentences. They encourage prisoners to blame others or to assist the government's prosecution. They call that taking Route 35, shorthand for what's euphemistically referred to as a post-sentencing cooperation agreement. Well, very, very, very interesting book. Highly recommend it. Just the Cuban Five and their experience in the, American prison system, which they were there for, I think, 15 or 16 years before their sentence, I think, was commuted under Obama. This is one of them, Gerardo Hernandez. Solidarity is mutual. We offered it. We offered support in prison, and we received it too. Really cool book. Here, so this is a little bit about the prison system in Cuba compared to the United States. In U.S. prisons, they aim to dehumanize you. In Cuba, a prisoner is another human being. And then talks about like prison labor in the United States. It's a terrific deal for the government, a cheap workforce locked up in prison with no right to organize, no health safety protections, nothing, and just the paltry wages. It's just really, again, it's a form of slave labor, right? In the U.S. prison system, the road to rehabilitation does not exist. Let me see when they're talking about. Here we go. We were with many Cuban prisoners in the U.S. who had been inmates in Cuba as well. It's page 56. Some had come to the U.S. as part of the Mario boat lift in 1980. Others were balseros, rafters who crossed the Florida Straits in perilous contraptions of all kinds during the economic crisis in the 90s. There were about 20 Cubans at the Lompoc Federal Prison in California when I was sent there. Yes, material conditions in prison, especially in the newer ones, are a lot better than the ones. Cuba obviously can't compare living conditions in the richest country in the world with the economic resources in Cuba, but most of them recognize that prison personnel here in Cuba make a real effort to rehabilitate inmates, to help them. In the U.S., a prison counselor is someone who puts in his hours at work and does his best not to ever have to see you. In Cuba, they point out, when my family came to visit my counselor here, we called them re-educators, would ask for permission to sit with us. He'd talk with my wife and ask how the little girl was doing in school, what problems there were at home. He'd tell her how I was doing in prison. Quite the juxtaposition to people in the United States who are, are locked up, right? People are incarcerated. That doesn't happen in the U.S. The counselor is there to fill out forms for you and spends the day trying to make sure you don't come to him with a problem. When you do, he glares at you with a sour face. Human part is essential. I often give the example of a young neighbor of mine. When he was in high school, he was involved in something that rarely happens in Cuba, what's known in the U.S. as bullying. He was studying the countryside in a scholarship program, and he was being pestered and harassed. One day he took a knife, scuffled with the other boy, and stabbed him in the wrong place, killing him. The boy was sentenced to 7 years. During that time, he completed high school, went on to university. Every day they took him by bus from the prison to the university. Think about that. This kid, as a kid, he was being bullied, got into this fight, ended up, stabbing this other kid, killed him, went to prison 7 years. During that time, the prison would transport him to and from university each day so he could get his education. He took classes all day, and the bus brought him back to prison. Today, he is free and working as a psychologist. Wow. I use the example of this boy with my prison mates. Cuba, they say to me, when I was in prison back home, I was able to go visit my family on a pass. If a relative died, again, this is the book, the Cuban Five talk about their lives with the U.S. working class. It's the poor who face the savagery of the U.S. justice system. If a relative died, they gave you a pass. Sometimes I spend the weekend at home. Other times I'd work on the outside. So again, just the juxtaposition between what prison life is like in the United States. Again, the United States has the world's largest prison population, but we're the land of the free, as opposed to how, prisoners are treated in Cuba, actually treated with dignity and respect and treated like humans. And they're not completely isolated and removed. They try to keep these connections going. Recently, I had a conversation with a very prestigious young artist in Cuba, Mabel Poblet. She showed me some samples of her work. One stood out to me, an installation with hundreds of plastic flowers. Look at these flowers. She said they're made by a woman who was a prisoner in Holguin. We visited the women's prison there, met an inmate, Betsy Torres, who was making flowers. Mabel said, I had in mind doing an installation to use flowers, so I asked her to make some for me, the ones you see here. After she was let up for good behavior, I invited her to my opening of the exhibition. This type of exchange is the opposite of dehumanization that takes place in the U.S. prison system. People are given the opportunity to reintegrate and to rehabilitate themselves. What you see more often in the U.S. is that people who come in for a petty crime are made into real criminals inside the prison. I'll give you another example. What inmates in the U.S. who'd previously been in prison here in Cuba tell us. They say that if your family came to see you in a Cuban prison, there was a fellow prisoner who relatives haven't been able to visit, you can invite him to join you in family and share the food they brought. In the U.S., that's not allowed. Look at what the Bureau of Prisons calls its program statement. It says the Bureau of Prisons encourages contact with the outside, but in practice, it's opposite. They put up obstacles, including family visits. Okay. Yeah, and then the right in Cuba, you got the right to conjugal visits or to get a pass to see my family, not in the United States. So this Cuban 5 were Gerardo Hernandez, Ramon Labino, Antonio Guerrero, Fernando Gonzalez, and Rene Gonzalez. So highly recommend this book. Look up the story, the history of the Cuban 5. Super, super interesting piece. Much love, all part of people.